Hello and welcome to Journalism 100. I'm Professor Tracy Savage, and this is my lecture video. In this chapter, I will review Chapter 7, Movies. Dating back to the late 1800s, movies have had a substantial social and cultural impact on society. Hollywood is America's storyteller. Films have also helped moviegoers sort through experiences that either affirmed or deviated from their own values. And finally, movies have acted to bring people together. They distract us from our daily struggles. This chapter, Chapter 7, outlines film's early technology and the evolution of film as a mass medium. It looks at the arrival of silent feature films, the emergence of Hollywood, and the development of the studio system. It explores the coming of sound and the power of movie storytelling. It analyzes major film genres, directors, and alternatives to Hollywood style, including independent films. It surveys the movie business today and examines how convergence has changed the way the industry distributes movies. Let's start with the technological developments that led to the creation of movies. A handful of enterprising people are responsible for taking us from still photos to the movies we see today. The concept of film goes back as early as Leonardo da Vinci, who theorized in the late 15th century about creating a device that would reproduce reality. An early precursor to film included the magic lantern developed in the 1600s that projected images on painted glass plates using an oil lamp as a light source. Then, in 1824, came the invention of the thaumatrope, which was a two-sided card with different images on each side that appeared to combine the images when twirled. The zoetrope was developed in 1834. It was a cylindrical device that rapidly twirled images inside a cylinder which simulated moving images. The development stage of movies began when inventors started manipulating photographs to make them appear to move while simultaneously projecting them onto a screen. Edward Muybridge is credited with being the first to do both. He studied motion by using multiple cameras to take successive photographs of humans and animals in motion. His most famous study involved using photography to determine if a racehorse actually lifts all 4 feet from the ground at a full gallop. It does. By 1880, Muybridge developed a method of projecting the photographic images onto a wall for public viewing. Meantime, other inventors were also working on capturing moving images and projecting them. George Eastman, in 1884, developed the first roll film, a huge improvement over the heavy metal and glass plates used to make individual photos. In 1889, Hannibal Goodwin improved Eastman's roll film by creating celluloid. Celluloid is thin strips of transparent, pliable material that could hold a coating of chemicals sensitive to light. Louis-Aimé Augustin Leprince, a Frenchman living in England, developed the first motion picture camera using roll film. Leprince is credited with filming the first motion picture called Roundhay Garden Scene. About 2 seconds worth of this film survives today. Thomas Edison, key in the development of sound recording, also takes center stage in the invention of motion pictures. He got his assistant, William Kennedy Dixon, to combine his incandescent light bulb, Goodwin's celluloid, and Leprince's camera to create another early movie camera, the kinetograph, and a single-person viewing system, the kinetoscope. The kinetoscope was a small projection system that housed 50 feet of film that revolved on spools. It served as a kind of peep show in which viewers looked through a hole and saw images moving on a tiny plate. The first kinetoscope parlor, featuring 2 rows of coin-operated machines, opened on Broadway in New York in 1894. Meanwhile, in France, brothers Louis and Auguste Lumière in 1895 developed the cinematograph, a combined camera, film developer, and projection system which allowed more than one person at a time to see the moving images on a large screen. While innovators around the world were now dabbling in moving pictures, Edison's lab renewed its interests in films. Edison patented several inventions and manufactured a new projection system called the Vitascope, which was a much larger screen movie projection system. This was the first hint of the potential of movies to be a mass medium. In 1896, Edison's first public showing of the Vitascope was at a music hall in New York City. It featured shots from a boxing match and waves rolling onto a beach. The Vitascope was marked the beginning of the entrepreneurial stage. Short movies had become a part of the entertainment industry and were showing up in amusement arcades, traveling carnivals, wax museums, and theaters. Movies became a mass medium because of the invention of narrative films, movies that told stories. These movies kept the audiences engaged because they had suspension of disbelief. The silent movie era was from 1894 to 1927. The Life of an American Fireman was the first big breakthrough film of the silent movie era. In 1902, directed by E.S. Porter, who was one of Thomas Edison's employees, this movie changed the way that movies were shot because he was the first one to have close-up shots. Another significant movie of this era is The Birth of a Nation, released in 1915, a silent epic drama. It was directed by D.W. Griffith, who was the Steven Spielberg of early Hollywood. It paved the way for future narrative filmmakers by refining many of the narrative techniques, including varied camera distances, close-up shots, and multiple storylines. It was the first feature-length film, more than an hour long, produced in America. The 3-hour movie, though very racist, was the very first blockbuster. The arrival of Nickelodeons was another major development in the evolution of film as a mass medium. Nickelodeons were the first movie theaters, whose name combines the admission price, a nickel, with the Greek word for theater. Nickelodeons frequently were small makeshift theaters housed in converted storefronts built to mimic vaudeville theaters. They were often managed by immigrants because they showed silent films that transcended language barriers. Nickelodeons flourished during the great European immigration at the turn of the century. The craze, though, peaked by 1910 when entrepreneurs began to seek more affluent spectators, attracting them with larger and more lavish movie theaters. By the late 1910s, the movie industry's three basic economic divisions, production, distribution, and exhibition, had been established. Among the first to try his hand at dominating the movie business was Thomas Edison, who in 1908 formed the Motion Pictures Patents Company, known as the Trust. The company, made up of a cartel of major U.S. and French film producers, pooled patents in an effort to control film's major technology. But the independent producers were not having it and ended up going to Hollywood. Southern California turned out to be great because there was cheap labor, a diverse scene, and a mild climate. By the 1920s, film production had evolved into the studio system, which turned filmmaking into an assembly line process with stars, directors, editors, writers, and others working under exclusive contracts for the major studios. Production companies developed distribution techniques like block booking, which was pressuring theater owners to screen marginal films with no stars in order to have access to popular films with the big stars. Producers like Adolph Zucker conspired to dominate exhibition by owning the first-run theaters, attracting middle and upper-class audiences with movie palaces. Adolph Zucker, who ran Paramount Studios, like Edison, also used tactics to try to control the entire industry. His method to control the business was known as vertical integration. It is controlling the production, everything involved in movie making, the distribution, getting the films into theaters, and the exhibition, playing films in the theaters. By 1921, Zucker's Paramount owned 300 movie theaters. Film storytelling capabilities were enhanced by the addition of sound and the development of the classic Hollywood style. Filmmakers refined narrative techniques during the silent era, and the Hollywood star system was also established as film became a viable art form. The movie The Jazz Singer marked the new era of sound films. Released in 1927 and produced by Warner Brothers, it was the first movie with sound. Movies with sound became known as talkies. Warner Brothers, though, was not the only studio exploring sound. 5 months before The Jazz Singer opened, Fox Studio premiered sound film newsreels. Fox's newsreel company, Movietone, captured the first film footage with sound. The Movietone method eventually became film's standard sound system. In the 1920s, 5 studios dominated the industry known as the Big Five: Paramount, MGM, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, and RKO. These Big Five major studios had clearly established vertical integration in the industry. Also, there were the Little Three: Columbia, Universal, and United Artists. These 8 companies formed a powerful oligopoly. By the mid-1940s, the Justice Department was demanding that the 5 major film companies end vertical integration. That's the simultaneous control over production, distribution, and exhibition. In a Supreme Court decision, the studios were forced to divest or sell off their movie theaters. Around the same time, in 1947, conservative members of Congress began investigating Hollywood for communist ties. The Hollywood 10 were 9 screenwriters and 1 film director subpoenaed by the House Un-American Activities Committee, who were sent to prison in the late 1940s for refusing to disclose their memberships or to identify communist sympathizers. The documentary film genre developed as a style that interprets reality by recording actual people and settings. The major contribution of documentaries is that it takes on controversial and unpopular subject matter. The documentary style cinema verite allowed filmmakers to go where cameras could not go before and record fragments of everyday life more unobtrusively. Cinema verite is a French term for truth films. The success of documentary films like Super Size Me and Fahrenheit 9/11 helped the rise of indies. Independent filmmakers typically operate on a shoestring budget and show their movies in thousands of campus auditoriums and at hundreds of small film festivals. The invention of digital video helped take some power away from the Hollywood studios because indie movies could now be made more cheaply. Digital video is the production format that's replacing celluloid film and revolutionizing filmmaking because the cameras are more portable and production costs are much less expensive. By the mid-1950s, significant cultural and social changes had begun to reshape the movie-going experience. It began in the late 1940s with the popularity of radio, and then in the 1950s with the rise of TV. Both of these mediums, which provided free entertainment, impacted movie ticket sales. And after World War II, people began moving to the suburbs and spending most of their discretionary income on household products instead of on movie tickets. The film industry tried to adapt by focusing on subject matter that television did not encourage. For the first time, Hollywood directors began to explore topics that were formerly off limits to film, such as alcoholism, mental illness, racism, drug abuse, and sexuality. Another way the movie industry tried to adapt was by introducing a host of technology improvements to lure Americans away from their TV sets and radios. For instance, Technicolor had improved and was being used in more movies to draw people away from their black and white TV sets, and 3D was introduced to the public as well. By the 1970s, the movie industry faced even more competition and challenges. Cable TV and the video cassette transformed contemporary movie exhibition, a transformation that continues with streaming video and other new technologies. To combat the home theater market, Hollywood in the late 1970s began to invest in multi-screen complexes, and the trend continued into the mid-1990s with leading theater chains building more megaplexes. By 2014, the movie exhibition business had grown to a record number of indoor screens, most of them at megaplex locations. Movie theater chains have also added IMAX screens and digital projectors in order to exhibit specially mastered 3D blockbusters that carry higher ticket price. And in the 1970s, studios focused on the blockbusters, big-budget special effects films that typically have a summer or holiday release date with heavy promotion and lucrative merchandising tie-ins. In the 1970s, these movies became mega hits at the box office. Jaws and Star Wars were the first movies to gross more than $100 million at the U.S. box office in a single year. Because of these films, major studios set in place economic strategies for the future and for future decades. Movie studios tend to lose money on 80 to 90% of newly released movies. They make up for the loss with the one or two major hits each year. Most of the revenue isn't made domestically. Global box office revenues have grown rapidly overseas. The majority of the revenue comes from China, Russia, and Mexico. In order to flourish, the movie industry has had to continually revamp its production, distribution, and exhibition system and consolidate its ownership. From the late 1990s to today, the movie industry has been ruled by 6 companies: Walt Disney Studios, Sony Pictures Entertainment, Paramount Pictures, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers Pictures, and Universal Studios. The Big 6 account for 77% of the revenue generated by commercial films. They control more than half of the movie market in Europe and Asia, and 5 of the companies are owned by large parent conglomerates, except for Disney. As far as convergence, it is movie industry's biggest challenge: the internet. The industry tries to embrace it by creating its own streaming services. 2012 marked for the first time as movie fans accessed more movies through digital online media than physical copies. And this creates 2 long-term paths for Hollywood: making blockbuster movies, as they've done for 40 years, and expensive digital distribution of lower-budget documentaries and independent films. Popular movies and democracy. Commercial U.S. films function as consensus narratives by providing shared cultural experiences. With the rise of international media conglomerates, however, movie diversity and a public debate over U.S. domination of the global film business fall by the wayside. This is the end of this lecture video. Be sure to read the entire chapter and do your discussion board assignment. Then review the study guide and the key terms, and by the end of this week, you'll take the quiz for this chapter. Good luck, everyone.